We are tied at 2 aside. It's a best of 3 heading back to Boston. 116-115 is your final. And finally, Philly fans can say, look at our guys. James Harden, Joel Embiid both going off, which is not something we've been able to say for injury or otherwise. 42 for Harden, 34 for Embiid, and a knotted series as the Sixers take Game 4. And for more, we say hello to CBS Sports basketball writer James Herbert. James, another classic here provided by this postseason. Your emerging thought here from that wild finish is what?
I guess James Harden is where I have to start. I mean, that was an incredible game, pretty much start to finish for James Harden. I thought in the second quarter when Embiid went for a rest, that's where Harden really started to get going, started kind of getting pretty much wherever he wanted on the floor. I thought he did a good job getting to his mid-range, the sort of stuff that we saw in Game 1 of this series, and also just making the right reads, kicking it out when that was the right play, and he hit some big shots. He hit the biggest shot in the game on a kick-out 3, and I think that is particularly notable to me because throughout James Harden's career, he's been an incredible three-point shooter, but picture James Harden in your mind taking a 3. You're usually thinking of him sizing somebody up, taking it one-on-one, maybe one of those step backs that, was a very innovative thing that Harden sort of introduced. You don't think of him as a catch and shoot guy. I know in Brooklyn, that was one of the sort of issues when he was playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, was you have these other guys who can create, and Harden's uncomfortable spotting up and taking those shots. The Sixers have tried to work on that with him, and in a huge moment when Jaylen Brown elects to go and double Joel Embiid, Harden's just ready. He takes it with no hesitation. That turns out to be the game winner.
Inarguably, the two biggest shots of this series thus far coming off the hand of James Harden. You allude to the step-back game. That was the look in Game 1. It's a short corner 3 here in Game 4, and we are tied at 2 aside. You also said something very interesting there. Harden started to get going, his 42, 8, and 9 throughout this entire game, but really found his groove with Joel on the bench. There were moments where those two worked nicely in concert, not just drawing doubles away from the other. Did you see them figure anything out in terms of playing with one another? We saw Harden's numbers in Games 2 and 3 with Embiid back on the court and how they sort of flounder with the presence of the MVP, but here, both of them get to an impressive output.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they kind of figured out was Embiid deferred to Harden a little bit. I think especially late in the game, Embiid, he came back in maybe a little bit early, came back in with about 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. He did not leave the game. He is laboring. He is still kind of feeling the effects of that knee injury in the fourth quarter. Like, it wasn't a great showing for Embiid individually. Al Horford blocked him 3 separate times. I thought the Celtics did a really good job in that final frame of not fouling him. That was part of how Embiid got going in the first place. I think he had with 4 for 5 from the line in the first quarter when he had 12 points in the opening frame. And later on, I think it was more the Harden show. They gave Embiid some of those isolations, and he did a good job. He drew a foul in overtime that I thought was absolutely crucial. And then, the game-winning possession that we spoke about earlier, the Celtics elected to go and double him. Like, that is something I think Boston, if they regret anything, it might be that possession, just sort of their defensive approach. A 2 ties it, a 3 beats you. And they elected to double team Embiid. He made the right play. He trusted James Harden to step up in that moment. And I think they are trusting each other at this point. And I think Embiid recognizes that sometimes down the stretch of these games, it's going to be easier for them to play through Harden.
Yeah, he's got the personal accolade. We know he wants the team awards now, and it's going to take some of that deference from one to the other at times. You allude to a decision on court at one end. Immediately, the next possession at the other. It's interesting that Joe Mazzulla elects not to use one of his 2 remaining timeouts, lets his guys go out there. Obvious they knew what they wanted to get to. Smart sets it up, gets the ball to Tatum. Tatum drives, kicks. Good look for Smart. Any issue not taking the time up and turn into an ATO?
No issue whatsoever. I mean, you look at the 2 looks that they got in those situations. One at the end of regulation, they don't call a timeout. They get a kick-out 3 to Marcus Smart completely wide open. That time, he misses it. But, you have to be happy with that look. And then in overtime, same idea. They go after Tyrese Maxey. They put him in the pick and roll. Tatum gets downhill, kick out. If he had just gone a little bit earlier, then that's ideal, and the Celtics win this game because Marcus Smart gets the shot off in time. It was just a little bit late. That's not because Mazzulla didn't call timeout. He could have designed an ATO, and they still could have gotten into it a little bit late. Could have been in that situation. I don't think it's fair to blame the coach for that one, especially when you consider the kind of main action that ended up producing the open looks that we're talking about. If you call a timeout, you give Doc Rivers a chance to say, all right, Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, you come here and sit down. We're not going to let the Boston Celtics target you on defense. He can just put his 5 best defenders on the court. I think the obvious reason that you don't call a timeout is so you still have those advantages. Those great offensive players that can be exploited on the other end, they end up still in the game. That is how Boston created those open looks, and I think they'll take those looks.
Yeah, it's a great point. They got the matchups, they got the look, they didn't get the shot, and series are decided by shots in these moments. Harden hits, Smart can't get it off in time, and just like that, we're looking at 2-2 instead of 3-1 headed back to Boston. It's those little moments that go a long way in deciding series. What does this series look like? Point of view for you, because throughout, regardless of the win in game one, there was still the Boston is the most complete team. They're going to get it done. Now it's a best of 3, and I hesitate to say anything can happen because the better team usually emerges, but anything still could happen. What does this series look like to you moving forward with momentum on Philly's side?
Yeah, I mean, I do think anything can happen. And I mean, this reminds me of a couple of series that Boston played last year on the way to the finals where they had opportunities to take control and they let a couple of games slip away from them. It's weird to frame it that way just because they started so slowly and had to fight so hard to get back. But I did think Boston was playing better basketball than Philadelphia down the stretch. Just a couple of key plays didn't go their way. PJ Tucker came up with a huge offensive rebound. One of them was off of an air ball. Then he got an and one, and a different one. I don't even know if he got credit for the offensive rebound, but it ended up being an out of bounds play in the extra frame that ended up giving Philadelphia an extra possession where I believe Joel Embiid hit a jumper after that. There's just these little things that can tilt extremely close games, and the Sixers just made a couple more of those because this really was anybody's ball game down the stretch. I think if Boston had done a better job taking care of the ball early in the game, if Boston had made more of their open threes in the first quarter, if they had done a better job keeping the Sixers off the line throughout, then we might be sitting here talking about how Boston is the more complete team, the more balanced team. Like the roster, if you compare the two, the Celtics do have more two-way players. They have more versatility. They have more kind of playoff guys in their rotation. But the Sixers do present matchup problems. One of them is an enormous matchup problem. It comes in the form of the MVP, Joel Embiid, who Boston sometimes is okay with having Al Horford check one-on-one. Other times they want to trap him, get the ball out of his hands, and that creates open shots. And the other one is Harden, who has now twice just absolutely gone off and picked apart Boston's defense in this series.
James, to your point, the Celtics defense holding the Sixers to just 15 points in that fourth quarter. It's how we ended up in overtime. History will not remember that. It will remember the shot from Harden, especially if Philly can emerge. We appreciate the time as always, James.
Thank you.
All right, here's a look at those 40-point playoff games in a single postseason. James Harden with his second of this series coming here in Game 4. The first coming in Game 1, tied a playoff career high there in Game 1, and was butting his head on it again here with 42 in Game 4.